Hello, I hope that everybody had a good holiday. This video is a little bit delayed because of that holiday, so it is only a couple days until the champion meeting starts, and I do apologize for that. I'm going to try to make my champion meeting related content as early as possible for most of the champion meetings, but because of the holiday, I just couldn't, do all the work to get this out. But today I'm going to talk about Maruzensky. In particular, I'm going to talk about Red Maruzensky and her ability to function in both front compositions as well as solo ace or pace compositions. So I do think that Red Maruzensky is one of the stronger picks, and she's also one of the more flexible picks. So there's a lot of different ways that you can run her. And in this video, I'm going to talk about pros and I'm going to compare the different ways that you can run her. I'm mostly going to be focused on pace Maruzensky because a lot of the front Maruzensky commentary that I have is more addressed in my triple front video, which I will link in the description. But pace Maruzensky is pretty interesting, and I'll be talking a lot about her team comps and different ways that you can run her with different kinds of assumptions about the lobby in this video as well. So thank you, and I hope that you enjoy. So Red Maruzensky is an Uma that has not really been meta herself in previous champion meetings. However, her unique inherent red shift has usually been pretty valuable on a couple of the different champions meetings that we've had in the past. Usually inherited onto late surgers or even pace chasers when front runners were not really viable. The reason for this is because her unique usually procs a little bit too early for frontrunners to take extreme advantage of it. But on this particular track, she is the only Uma who can take advantage of it. So she's turning the tables a little bit, which makes me, on a personal level, pretty happy because Red Maru was my first 3-star in my account, and I really like her. And so I'm really excited to be able to use her. And I just think she's great. So she can be run as a front runner or a pace chaser. She has an E in pace, which means that you need 10 pace sparks. The easiest way to do this would be to make a parent that has one grandparent that has pace sparks and one grandparent that has medium sparks, and get that parent to have medium sparks. Then you find a guest borrow with 9 pace sparks, and that way, by using your guest borrow and your one grandparent, you get a total of 10 pace sparks, and then you also have those medium sparks from your lineage to get her medium up to A, and hopefully to S, although it is a little bit trickier. I'm going to go ahead and explain the pros and cons of, I'm going to compare the front versus pace Maruzensky here in a little bit. But first I'll go ahead and give you more of a visual on why her unique works on her. So the red Uma on this track is going to be Red Maru, and the blue Uma is going to be Fujikiseki, who has inherited Red Maru's unique. So red shift begins on the final corner. Every race, that is the proc requirements for red shift. It's going to start activating on the final corner. And then in the final leg here is where Umas actually begin to accelerate to their top speed. So this is kind of when they unlock their full potential and start actually using their speed stat in order to try to win the game. So as you can see here, red shift that's inherited actually ends before they get that ability to start accelerating to their top speed. And only Maruzensky, who has the original version of red shift, has this little bit of carryover. So when this final leg starts, she's already trying to accelerate. So that acceleration will begin at the exact second of the final leg, which is one of the reasons why Maruzensky is so strong in this track. Red shift is also a very generalist skill. It activates when you're first, second, third, fourth, or fifth. So literally over 50% of slots in the lobby are slots you can activate red shift from. So that makes Red Maruzensky a pretty strong Uma pick, maybe one of the strongest Uma picks on this track. It just means that she is extremely flexible. And I'll explain a couple other ways that you can try to use her and, utilize this skill as best you can in multiple team comps. But basically, all you really need to know is only Red Maruzensky can use red shift. The exception here is if you have like an end closer or maybe a late surger, and you're not planning on hitting 5th place until around this part of the corner, then you can inherit redshift onto them, and they might be able to bump this redshift up a little bit further. So that's why sometimes you see late surges and end closers using redshift, even in maps on racetracks where it might be not advisable for like front runners and pace chasers to use redshift, because as soon as it meets its activation requirements, it's going to try to activate. But if you're not 5th place until like here, so if you're 5th place here and like you pass the 6th place person and you get to 5th place here, then you can activate it, which means then you get redshift here, right? That's kind of a moot point for Maruzensky herself, because she really wants to be run in front or potentially pace. So now let's go ahead and compare front Maruzensky versus pace Maruzensky. So before we get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to Flauke, who made my graphic and is hopefully going to help me with some graphics in the future. My previous graphics were pretty scuffed, so thank you very much for that. But let's go ahead and talk about front versus pace on Maruzensky. So front Maru is ironically going to be easier to build than pace Maru. Pace Maru requires 10 pace sparks, which means that you need to have at least one grandparent with pace sparks on them, and then borrow another guest borrow with 9 pace sparks, so you can reach 10. This reduces your chances of getting to medium S, which is definitely an issue when it comes to building a very consistent Maru, because you do want to have that medium S, so you might have to do more runs in order to get that on her. Another thing that front has is the triple front comp is just very strong. If you're running like a front Suzuka or like a runaway Suzuka, you pretty much want to be running Maruzensky in front. There's not a lot of reason to run her in pace, and so you want to run Maruzensky front when you're running Suzuka, when you're running a triple front comp. She's just very, very strong in that composition, and that composition is very meta. One of the reasons that the front composition is meta is because fronts are not very popular. So a mirror composition to triple front is really dangerous for it, and it's one of the ways you can counter triple front just by running triple front of your own. But because running fronts isn't very popular, it's a little bit less likely you're going to be running into this kind of composition, which automatically makes your fronts a little bit stronger. And now front Maruzensky does have a slightly higher chance to proc her unique, just because she will be in that 1st through 5th position more reliably, even in rooms where there may be 5 or even 6 fronts. If there's 5 fronts in your lobby, a pace Maruzensky is never going to proc her unique, and that is a lost condition for her. So it's a little bit more reliable in terms of at least hitting 1 acceleration. Now, I do think that pace Maruzensky is more reliable in hitting multiple accelerations. And I don't think that hitting 1 single acceleration is going to allow a front Maruzensky to win. Like, she still wants to hit something like shooting for victory, or to overtake dying Suzukas and hit angling and scheming, something like that. To that end, I do think that pace Maruzensky is more flexible. She has more win conditions that are a little bit easier for her to hit. And she's also a very natural pick for people who don't have Suzuka, because if you don't have Suzuka, you lose a lot of that lobby control. You never know if you're going to be in a lobby with a runaway Suzuka or not. And so what pace Maruzensky does is she enables you to be flexible, and she works in both versions of that. She works because a runaway Suzuka will still buff paces in general by pulling them further ahead of lates and ends, but she also works to try to counter Suzuka comps a little bit by chaining more accelerations than Suzuka comps have access to, because a Suzuka comp doesn't really, their other 2 friends don't have access to angling and scheming or unrestrained, because their Suzuka is the only one who's going to be hitting that. And so you're relying on your pace Maruzensky to hit shooting for victory, to hit redshift, chain that into shooting for victory, chain that into maybe head on, maybe nimble navigator, and then all of a sudden you have a huge acceleration package that you can use along with the pace, acceleration, and velocity multipliers to just rocket past the fronts. So she's a good option because Suzuka doesn't directly nerf her, but and she can also counter Suzuka lobbies. And so I do think that if you are looking for kind of a Uma to hinge your entire team composition around and you don't have Suzuka, pace Maruzensky is probably the best option. The reason that pace Maru is such a good generalist option in my opinion, is because she doesn't have very many fail conditions. It is harder for her to get into a position where she will just lose, or where she cannot compete, right? Because Pace Maru has to be 1st through 5th for her unique, it gives her a lot of flexibility in the final spurt to be in any of those positions. Ideally, she is 3rd, 4th, or 5th, so she can hit her unique and directly hit shooting for victory. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. The thing about pace compositions in general is that they have less lobby control than fronts, which means that our examples here are going to be a little bit more hypothetical than in a triple front composition, because you have to rely a little bit more on what other umas are being brought into the lobby. You can't just assume that there's always going to be 2 or 3 fronts in every single lobby. You can't just assume that there are going to be no fronts in every single lobby. So you have to kind of work within these unknowns in order to make it so that you have the highest chance of winning. Now, this is where I think front comps are really strong because they have more of that lobby control. But I think that you still have access to a third of the umas in your lobby, which means that you have control over a little bit of what your lobby composition is going to look like, and you can use that to your advantage. So the first composition that we're going to look at is going to be more of a vacuum. This is going to be a Pace Maru with 2 front, and this composition immediately forces her into 3rd place for that shooting for victory proc in the final corner. However, it is a little bit weaker because it increases your chances of being pushed into 6th place if you're in a lobby with a front heavy composition. So what I mean by this is that if you're in a lobby where an opponent is running a runaway Suzuka and 2 fronts, then your Maru is actually going to be 6th place, which means that she can't use red shift. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, no red shift. That is a loss condition for her. And it doesn't take a lot to be in a lobby with 3 other fronts. Even if you're in a lobby with, let's say, 2 enemy Suzukas, and then one of your opponents is running a Suzuka and their own Maru, your Pace Maru is still going to be in 6th. So for this reason, I wouldn't really recommend running Maruzensky with 2 separate fronts, even though that in a vacuum it does push her into the slot that she needs to win. Another team composition that you can consider is going to be Maruzensky as a pace, 1 front and 1 late. So this does reduce your chances of being pushed into 6th place, even if you hit a front heavy lobby. If your opponents are using 3 or fewer fronts, you will still have that win condition of red shift. And it also helps you to counter Suzukas a little bit more effectively, especially since you don't have your own. So by using a front runner here, you can stack this front runner with very, very heavy mid-race skills, very, very heavy wit, and use them to try and overtake Suzuka in order to kind of neuter her and make her so that she cannot use angling and scheming or unrestrained in the final spurt. This Uma's win condition is going to be getting in front of Suzuka if Suzuka is in the lobby, which is going to be admittedly a very difficult win condition for them. So this Uma is not going to win very often. But it increases your chances of countering Suzuka compositions, and it also increases your chances of winning in compositions that have a lot of fronts, because this front can, for example, push opponent fronts to 5th or 6th place, which might mean that they don't get to proc skills like shooting for victory. Now, with this, you have your Pace Maruzensky, who can also counter that Suzuka just by virtue of better accelerations. So this Maruzensky is, in a perfect world, going to hit red shift because she'll be 5th or maybe 4th, and then she'll hit shooting for victory, where she'll be 4th or 3rd, and then she'll be able to accelerate, even potentially using head-on, which is a pace-only acceleration skill that takes place in the final leg, and using all of that in order to pass the fronts, pass Suzuka, and win the game. In order to help with this, you can use a late surger like a hybrid dominator in order to drag all of the other Umas back further to help your Maruzensky. Now, to this end, you can also use a double late composition here and maybe run double late dominator hybrids or just full debuffers and put all of your eggs in the Maruzensky basket. This is possible because Maruzensky is such a generalist, and because she has such a strong ability to win the game, like she's almost never completely out of the running, especially if you are stacking up the Umas in the back, which means that Maruzensky is going to have a higher chance of being at least 5th, because if you are running 2 lates here, and for example your opponent is running 1 late here, 9th, 8th, 7th, Maru's 6th, but if you have another opponent running a late, or even a pace that's further behind Maru, she's going to be in 5th. So you have to kind of think about lobby positioning both from the front and from the back in order to try to push Maruzensky into that good ult zone. So with 2 lates and a Maruzensky, it's still possible that you are not in a front heavy lobby and she is actually pushed up to, let's say it's like 2nd place or 1st place. In that consideration, her red shift is still going to fire. She won't get shooting for victory, but if she has head on, which you would have to hope for from a unity explosion, but is a very powerful and crucial skill for a pace Maruzensky, she still has a shot, right? Actually, she has a pretty good shot, because if we're in a lobby like this, it means that there's not very many fronts. And fronts are very strong in the meta right now. So you can build her with lates, and these lates can be full trying to win lates like Dober, who's coming out soon, or Meiji Orion, or even like a Gold Ship End, Manhattan Cafe, or you can try to run a double dominator strategy in order to really help your Maru try to win as much as possible. Now, I don't think that I think that generally it's better to run triple ace than it would be to run a major debuffer. However, if you don't have time to make a triple ace and you want to run a single ace with multiple debuffers, then I do think that Pace Maruzensky is probably the best Uma to run double debuffers with, because she is the most flexible and has the widest win condition. Alright, so I have been trying for a couple days to make a Pace Maruzensky, but I haven't really been able to get one that I am really willing to show off. So instead, I am presenting here just some of the acceleration packages for both Pace and Front Maruzensky. You'll see here, of course, that Front Maruzensky does want taking the lead in groundwork, which might be a little bit trickier to get on her. It might restrict her deck a little bit more than Pace Maruzensky. And then she also does want to take angling and scheming, not because you will get it in every single rooms, especially when you're contending against Suzuka's, but Maruzensky, I think, is uniquely positioned to be able to take an angling and scheming proc after Suzuka dies, and you can see a little bit more about this in my triple front guide. So for a Pace Maruzensky, head-on is going to be pretty crucial, and you do want to try to get it if at all possible. It is going to be a random unity explosion skill, and so that can be really frustrating, especially when you're trying to combine that with a medium S run on a Uma who will just naturally have fewer medium S sparks. But it is pretty important on her, and it will help her to perform better. Nimble Navigator is not very reliable, but it's always a nice to have when it actually does proc. And so for here, you can see that even though Pace Maruzensky has fewer skills for acceleration than Front Maruzensky does, Pace Maruzensky is still more reliable, especially at hitting shooting for victory, than Front Maruzensky. And this is going to be a major difference because shooting for victory is so crucial on this track. And I think that Pace Maruzensky is uniquely positioned to take advantage of the front heavy compositions in order to be pushed back a little bit and still get redshift into shooting for victory, into head-on, into winning the game. Alright, so that is my Maruzensky guide for CM7 Scorpio Cup. I hope that was helpful. And let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts or questions about Red Maruzensky or the compositions that she can be run with, or if you are running her, just let me know kind of what you're using with her. I would love to hear about it. I'd love to chat about it. And thank you guys so much for watching my video, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.